Hello, I'm Carmen. It happened in a backyard full of family, but I've never felt more exposed in my life. My sister, she smiled, leaned in like she was helping, and ripped my dress open in front of everyone. What they saw wasn't just my skin. They saw the scar from the surgery she gossiped about for months behind my back. The worst part? It wasn't shock, it was silence. They clapped for her 5 minutes later. How did I get erased from my own family's story? And why did it take that moment to finally make me speak? Would you have said something? Would anyone? Because I didn't think I ever would. Until that day. 2 weeks before the family reunion, I stood in my kitchen, the late afternoon light slanting through the blinds and cutting across the tiles like sharp blades. The envelope had been sitting on the counter for hours. My name, Carmen Reyes, printed in cheap cursive ink, misspelled and unhyphenated. It wasn't the first time, but it still stung like the first paper cut of childhood. They always managed to get Vera's full name right, of course, complete with middle initial and honorary title, like some kind of suburban royalty. I stared at it, thumb resting on the edge, torn between the instinct to toss it in the trash or pretend none of it mattered. But it did. It always had. I hadn't been to one of these family reunions since before the surgery. And I knew what people said, or worse, what they didn't say. They didn't know what to do with someone who'd come undone and didn't hide it fast enough. I walked around the house for a while, restless. Picked up a dish towel. Folded it, unfolded it. My reflection in the microwave showed a woman who looked too tired to argue and too stubborn to stay home. I whispered aloud, "It's just dinner, not a verdict." But in this family, nothing was ever just anything. The night before the event, I didn't sleep well. I kept rehearsing responses to questions no one might ask. I tried on 3 different dresses, none of which could hide the faint ridge of my surgical scar. I settled on one that felt like armor, navy blue, soft cotton, fitted at the waist. Not too much, not invisible. When I arrived at Mom's house, Vera was already outside, greeting people like she ran for office. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, then turned and wrapped her arms around our cousin Becca, laughing like a champagne bottle popped somewhere behind her ribs. "Hi," I said, a little too soft. She glanced back at me, barely touched my elbow. "Carmen, you made it." I did. I stepped inside. The familiar scent of citrus cleaner and floral candles hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. Henrietta's house hadn't changed much. A few updated photos on the mantel, none of which included me. The family dog had died 5 years ago, but his bed was still in the same corner, like a shrine to loyalty. Vera's voice rang behind me. "Carmen's just very private these days," she told someone, not bothering to whisper. I recognized the tone. Sweet, but sharp, like a cake with salt instead of sugar. Then came the seating arrangement. I stood near the main dining table, waiting for someone to call me over. Instead, I was waved toward the card table in the hallway, right next to the guest bathroom. The smell of lemon-scented disinfectant didn't pair well with the green beans on my plate. Someone walking past said, "Oh, who's that sitting over there?" and laughed. I wanted to disappear. But more than that, I wanted to be seen for real, not pitied, not romanticized, not rebranded by my sister's curated version of me. I smiled through bites, nodding like I was fine. The chair beneath me creaked whenever I moved. I took small sips of water, trying to hold myself steady. A cousin asked about my job, but Vera answered before I could. "She's freelancing," she said brightly. "Mostly from home, right, Carmen?" I nodded, because fighting would only make me look dramatic. And dramatic was just one rung below unstable. An older aunt leaned in and said, "You've always been the quiet one. Still so delicate." She smiled like it was a compliment. I nodded again, pressing my tongue to the roof of my mouth so I wouldn't say something I'd regret. Later, I wandered toward the kitchen. The voices from the living room were loud. Vera retelling a story from our childhood, only it wasn't hers. It was mine. She had taken my memory, swapped her name in, and made herself the hero of a tale I once clung to when I needed to believe I mattered. I felt something shift inside me. A quiet rage. Not explosive, not theatrical, just a slow boil. Back at the table, I pushed food around my plate. The scar under my dress itched, not physically, but emotionally. like it knew what was coming. Suddenly, I wasn't just remembering the hospital. I was inside it again. The sterile light, the beep of machines, the curtain drawn too tight. I had asked the nurse not to allow visitors, not because I was embarrassed, but because I couldn't bear Vera standing over me, eyes wide with concern she didn't feel. It wasn't just the procedure that left me scarred. It was everything before it, the years of invasive questions and shallow reassurances. And the way "when are you having kids" turned into "what's wrong with you," without anyone actually saying it. I sat there in that hallway, the laughter from the living room echoing around me, and I realized this wasn't passive ignorance, this wasn't forgetfulness. It was a deliberate choice to exclude, to rewrite, to erase. I didn't move right away. That realization, this wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, hung over me like fog, clinging to every thought as I shifted in the wobbly folding chair next to the hallway bathroom. My fingers tightened around the glass of water, the condensation slick against my skin, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, so I wouldn't let anyone see the hurt pushing up into my chest. I turned my head to scan the living room, needing a moment of focus on anything but Vera's voice. That's when I saw him. Across the room, laughing near the drink station with Vera like they were old friends, stood Jonas. It didn't register at first. His haircut was different, shorter and tighter on the sides. His shirt was crisp, more tailored than I remembered. But the laugh, that lopsided, charming, slightly too loud laugh, I hadn't heard it in 3 years, and yet it dropped into my stomach like ice. My ex-boyfriend. The man who ghosted me 3 days after I told him I might not be able to have children. I blinked, certain I was imagining things. But when he turned slightly and caught sight of me, he froze. Only for a second. Then he looked away, fast, and returned to chatting with Vera, pretending I wasn't there. And just like that, I knew. Vera had invited him. Of course she had. There's no way Jonas would have shown up to a Reyes family gathering otherwise, not after how we ended. She didn't do it to rekindle some spark or create closure. She did it because she wanted to throw a match into a box she knew was soaked in gasoline. My stomach knotted, and I tasted bile in the back of my throat. I stayed seated, not trusting myself to stand yet. If I left now, she'd win. Again. If I caused a scene, she'd spin it as Carmen being unhinged, emotional, unstable, her favorite adjectives for me. So I sat, hands folded in my lap, watching them from the corner of my eye. It was subtle at first. Vera raised her voice just enough to be overheard, the way someone does when they want the wrong person to hear every word. "Oh, Jonas," she said, clapping his shoulder like they were childhood friends. "I can't believe you haven't heard. Carmen's doing much better after her little procedure." People around them shifted. A few heads turned. I sat up straighter without meaning to, suddenly hyper-aware of how the fabric of my dress hugged my midsection. Jonas glanced at me for a split second, then looked away. My chest tightened. My little procedure? That wasn't a phrase Vera just stumbled upon. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Is she okay now?" someone nearby asked. "She's managing," Vera replied with a faux whisper, pressing her lips together like she was being respectful of my privacy while simultaneously dragging me through a spotlight. It was something reproductive-related, female health stuff. The word reproductive hit like a slap. I stood up, legs shaky beneath me, and excused myself from the hallway table. No one stopped me. No one even seemed to notice. I walked toward the kitchen, away from the living room noise, but I didn't stop there. I kept going until I reached the back hallway, ducked into the guest bathroom, and closed the door behind me. I leaned against it, pressing the lock into place with a trembling finger. The room smelled faintly of lavender and bleach. I stared at myself in the mirror. My lipstick was intact, but the flush climbing up my neck gave me away. My hands went to my stomach, pressing lightly through the fabric. I wasn't crying. I wouldn't give Vera that satisfaction, but my throat burned. Outside, I heard muffled voices. Someone said, "Was it cosmetic surgery?" Another replied, "I think it was. You know, down there." Vera said it had to do with something reproductive. So now I was the subject of whispered side conversations. Again. I closed my eyes and let the memory come. The hospital ceiling had tiny cracks, like spider webs in white paint. I remember counting them, trying to distract myself from the fact that my uterus was gone. I remembered the way the nurse gently touched my wrist, asking if I wanted to allow visitors. I told her no, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want pity. Not from Vera, not from anyone. I signed the consent form with a hand that shook, not from fear of the surgery, but from the knowledge that I'd never be seen the same again. Not by partners, not by family, not even by myself. Not long after I told Jonas the truth, told him that I'd likely never carry children, he stopped returning my messages. A week later, I found out he'd gone on a date with someone he met at a gym. Now he was here, laughing with my sister, sipping sangria, pretending he didn't once leave me at my lowest. A soft knock interrupted the spiral in my mind. I froze. "It's me," a voice said. "Callum." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted company, but my voice surprised me. "Yeah?" "I just wanted to say, that was out of line," he said through the door. "She shouldn't have brought him, and the way she talked about you, it's not okay." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Thanks," I managed. There was a pause. "If you need to step outside for air, I'm around. Just letting you know." His footsteps receded down the hallway, leaving me in silence. I looked in the mirror again, met my own eyes. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I wasn't weak. But Vera wanted me to look like I was. It wasn't just the dress she wanted to tear someday. It was everything I had left that made me me, my story, my strength, my truth. And I wasn't going to let her have it. I stayed in that guest bathroom a while, maybe too long. I rinsed my hands, reapplied my lipstick, smoothed my hair, anything to avoid going back into that room where my history was being repackaged by someone else. Eventually, I heard chairs scraping the floor, silverware clinking. People were heading to the dining area for dinner. I took a breath and stepped out. My heels clicked against the tile as I walked slowly back toward the crowd, weaving between conversations I wasn't part of. The table was already full. Again, no one had saved me a seat at the main dining setup. I caught Vera's eye across the room. She looked away before I could hold her gaze. I ended up at the same folding table near the bathroom, sitting beside an elderly great-aunt who barely remembered my name. That might have hurt less if it weren't for the fact that I once drove her to every single doctor's appointment during the winter of 2016. Dinner started slow, the usual background chatter rising and falling. Then Vera stood up and clinked her glass with the back of a spoon. "All right, everyone," she called out, her voice full of artificial warmth. "Let's take a moment to thank those who made today happen." I set down my fork, unsure why my heart skipped a beat. Maybe, foolishly, I expected my name to surface. "I want to thank Mom, of course, for opening her home to all of us," she said, gesturing toward Henrietta with that pageant wave she did so well. "To my amazing husband Callum for setting up the tents and chairs, to Becca and Allison for handling the food and decor, and even the kiddos. They helped carry ice and set up drinks." Polite applause followed. I sat there, staring straight ahead. No mention of me, not a word. It didn't feel like an oversight. It felt orchestrated. The cousin who used to braid my hair at sleepovers, who called me her soul twin back in high school, stood there listing people alphabetically and left me out like I was a guest who'd just wandered in from the neighborhood. I pushed a piece of salad around my plate, the vinaigrette stinging the small cut on the corner of my mouth I didn't know I had. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. But something inside shifted. Again. After dinner, people milled about the yard, sipping sweet tea and picking at pie. I walked toward the dessert table when Vera sidled up next to me. She reached down and flicked at the hem of my dress with her perfectly manicured nail. "This is cute," she said, her voice soaked in condescension. "You sew this yourself. Very Etsy." A few heads turned. A couple of polite chuckles followed. I forced a smile. "Actually, yes," I said, keeping my voice level. "I made it last month." She leaned in a little too close. "You always were the crafty one. Not creative, not artistic, crafty, like a Girl Scout. I wanted to say something, anything, but I knew better. I knew the moment I defended myself, she'd weaponize it. "Oh, Carmen's sensitive," she'd say. always takes things the wrong way. So I swallowed the words and turned to grab a slice of pecan pie, though my appetite was gone. Back near the porch, a slideshow played on a mounted screen, photos from past reunions, vacations, birthdays. I watched from a distance, arms crossed over my chest. 12 years ago, I planned a reunion almost entirely on my own. I ordered the banners, coordinated the food, arranged the seating chart, printed custom t-shirts with our family name on the back. I spent 2 nights folding napkins into little roses and arranging centerpieces with mason jars and fresh flowers. In the pictures from that day, everyone smiled. But no one held a sign saying I made any of it happen, and back then, I didn't care. I was just proud to be part of something. Now I couldn't even be sure they remembered I was there. A little later, I saw Allison, the cousin who used to be closest to me, standing near the fire pit with a drink. I approached, hopeful. "Hey," I said. She turned and gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hey, I didn't see you earlier." I nodded. "It's a big crowd." "Yeah." She looked past me. "I should get back. Vera asked me to help coordinate something for dessert." That was her out. "Sure," I said. "Of course." And just like that, another door shut. I turned away, heart thudding in my chest. I wasn't angry at Allison, not really. I knew Vera's tactics. She didn't push people out with cruelty. She drowned them with charm. She made everyone feel useful, adored, important. And she made sure I looked like the outlier. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me being reserved or distant. It wasn't about my surgery or my job or my lack of children. It was about Vera being loud enough, consistent enough, persistent enough to narrate over me, to narrate instead of me. She wasn't just louder in volume, she was louder in presence. I'd stayed quiet because I thought silence protected my peace, but maybe all it did was leave enough space for her to speak for me. By the time the sun dipped below the trees and paper lanterns started glowing across the backyard, I had made a choice. I wouldn't force my way into conversations. I wouldn't beg to be acknowledged. But I also wouldn't let her tell my story anymore. I didn't sleep that night. After the toasts, the polite smiles, the diluted sweet tea, and the way my name was left out like a stain no one wanted to scrub, I drove home in silence. But silence isn't empty. Silence holds questions you can't ask out loud, like how did I let it get this far? Or why does it still sting, even when I know what to expect? I arrived the next day to pick up the scarf I'd accidentally left in the guest room. An excuse, maybe, but also a way to measure just how invisible I'd become. The front door was unlocked, as usual. Inside, the house smelled like leftover roast and lemon cleaner. I moved quietly, not wanting to make it look like I'd come back for anything more than fabric. Then I saw it. A new display near the living room. A table set up with framed photos, old newspaper clippings, and a small wooden plaque, hand-painted in cursive. "Thank you to Vera for being our family's anchor through Mom's illness." The words didn't hit me at first. They hovered, almost surreal, like something someone else might be reading. But the photos? They were real. Vera standing by Mom's hospital bed with a warm smile. Vera wheeling Henrietta through the rehab center garden. Vera feeding her soup in the recovery wing. Only none of those things actually happened. Not those exact scenes. The truth was, I had been the one in that room at 3 a.m. helping Mom to the bathroom, washing her hair in a plastic basin, warming soup she didn't eat. And Vera? Vera visited twice. Once with balloons, once with a camera. I stood there staring at the pictures, at the history that had been rewritten while I was still living it. I thought of that night in the hospital when Mom whispered, "Don't tell Vera, she'll make it about herself." And she was right. Somehow, she was always right about Vera and still gave her the spotlight. My throat tightened, but I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't give that part of me away. I turned to leave the room and nearly collided with Noira, Vera's daughter. 16 going on 30, full of opinions she hadn't earned but carried like inherited jewelry. "Oh," she said with a smirk, not mean exactly, just rehearsed. "Didn't know you were here." "I left something," I said, nodding toward the hallway. She looked me up and down, then said, "Mom said you used to cry a lot, but you don't look like a crier." I froze. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it, as if she was commenting on the weather, as if it had been a family joke passed down like a recipe card. Carmen cries too much. I forced a smile, the kind you make when there's no polite way to respond. Well, I said, I suppose we all grow out of some things. She shrugged and walked off, scrolling her phone as she went. I stood in place a moment longer, absorbing the echo of her words, hearing Vera's voice behind them. She's just sensitive. She takes everything to heart. You know how she is. It's amazing how a narrative becomes a legacy. Later, I walked back toward the kitchen to say goodbye to Mom. As I passed the dining area, I caught Callum standing alone by the window, watching the yard. His arms were crossed, his mouth tight. Our eyes met briefly. Before I could approach, Vera swooped in, looped her arm around his, and dragged him toward the patio for another group photo. His body followed, but his eyes lingered on me for half a second longer than they should have. That night, I found myself back in the guest bathroom. Not because I needed to be there, but because it had become the only place in that house where I felt like I could breathe. I turned the faucet, cupped cold water into my hands, and patted my face. When I looked up, I saw the faint outline of my scar through the fabric of my dress. Not obscene, not shocking, just there. A fact. Like everything else Vera tried to hide or reframe. I stood there, gripping the counter, staring into my own eyes. This family didn't want a version of me that couldn't be edited into their scrapbook. They didn't know what to do with the real me, the one who stayed, who nursed, who endured, but didn't show up well-dressed for photo ops. I dried my face, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the living room. Mom was sitting in her recliner, sipping tea from her favorite mug, the one that read, "World's Best Grandma," in fading blue letters. "Hey," I said, kneeling beside her. She smiled. "You didn't have to come back, sweetheart." "I forgot something," I replied, then added, "but I'm glad I did." I hesitated, then leaned in a little closer. "Mom, you remember when you had your stroke, and I stayed with you? Through therapy, meds, everything?" She looked at me, a little confused, then nodded slowly. "Of course. Why?" "Because Vera's plaque says she was your anchor. And those photos, none of them are from those nights. They're from visits, not care." Mom sighed. She didn't meet my eyes. "Vera she shows up better in pictures. That's all." I laughed quietly, a humorless sound. "That's what matters?" "Carmen," she said gently, placing a hand on mine. "Don't take it personally." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stood up slowly, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "That's kind of all I ever did." On the way out, I grabbed my scarf, paused by the tribute wall once more, then walked to my car without looking back. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't journal. I didn't call anyone. I sat on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea and silence. And in that silence, a decision crystallized. If I didn't fight for my story, Vera would keep writing it for me. The next day came with bright skies and a breeze that should have felt refreshing, but I couldn't feel much of anything besides the strange buzzing under my skin. You know the feeling, when your body is ahead of your brain, already bracing for something you haven't even named yet. I arrived back at Mom's house for what Vera called the closing lunch. Leftover barbecue, sun tea, store-bought cake. People milling about like they hadn't just clapped while my entire role in this family was scrubbed clean. I stepped into the house through the side door, passing a stack of empty water bottles near the recycling bin. I could already hear Vera's voice from the kitchen, clear, bright, and aimed outward like a spotlight. When I walked into the dining room, the video was already playing. A slideshow projected onto the wall showed old family photos, backyard cookouts, Christmas mornings, hospital snapshots. I paused at the edge of the room, watching Vera narrate each image like she had been there through it all. Then it came, the embroidered family tree, displayed on a small easel near the front window, framed in dark walnut wood, was the gift I had spent weeks quietly crafting. Each leaf hand-stitched, each name double-checked and spelled correctly, even Vera's. I had wrapped it gently that morning in linen and placed it on the counter with a note for Mom. I never signed the note. I didn't think I had to. Vera stood beside it now, hands folded delicately at her waist. I just wanted Mom to have something meaningful, she said, eyes glistening just enough for the room to collectively sigh. Applause followed, polite but warm. Noira clapped. Even Mom wiped at her eye. I stood there, stunned. That small cloth, something made out of care, detail, and time, now had someone else's name stamped on it in everyone's mind. Callum met my eyes from across the room. His face didn't shift, but he looked away almost immediately. I couldn't stay in there. I walked out of the room and into the hallway, my hands shaking. I ended up back in the laundry room, where the buzz of the dryer was the only sound. My hands clutched the edge of the washer until my knuckles whitened. All that time I spent stitching, remembering birthdays, double-checking generations, researching dates so everything would be right. I had stitched until my fingers cramped. And now Vera had taken it like it was hers to take, like everything else. That night, after I got home, I found myself replaying the whole thing. I boiled water for tea, sat at the kitchen table, opened a blank notebook, but nothing came out of me. The next day, I called Mom. She answered on the third ring, her voice light. Hi, sweetie. Hey, I wanted to ask you something about the gift. Oh, wasn't it beautiful? She said quickly. Vera really outdid herself this time. Mom, I said, keeping my tone steady. That was my embroidery. I made that. Silence. I worked on it for weeks, I continued. The linen, the thread, it was all mine. I left it on the counter for you. Mom hesitated. Well, maybe she thought it was a team effort. It wasn't, she sighed. Honey, Vera she needs to feel appreciated. You don't. That's your strength. I swallowed hard. That's not strength. That's how you make someone disappear. There was nothing after that but soft static. A half apology floating between us, but never quite landing. That evening, I went for a walk. Sacramento's early autumn leaves were already turning. The sidewalks were quiet, except for the occasional car or wind chime. I took the long way, past the school where Vera used to drop off Noira and wave like she was campaigning. I circled back through the park, the one where we'd once hosted a birthday for Mom, years ago, back when things felt fixable. I needed air before I did what I knew I had to do. The next morning, I texted Vera and asked to meet. She chose a cafe near the river, outdoor seating, plenty of foot traffic. Always the strategist. When I arrived, she was already there, sunglasses on, iced coffee in hand, like she hadn't stolen a single breath from me. I sat down across from her without saying anything. After a beat, she smiled. What's with the serious face? She asked. You look like you're about to scold me. I took a breath. You took credit for my embroidery. Vera tilted her head slightly. What are you talking about? The family tree, I said. You presented it like it was your idea, your work. She laughed. Carmen, it's a piece of cloth. It's more than that, and you know it. She took off her sunglasses slowly. Are we really doing this? You're upset because I brought something nice for Mom? I brought it. I made it. She waved a hand. Details. Honestly, you should be grateful I even brought it out. You would have just handed it over quietly. Nobody would have noticed. Because you make sure of that, I said flatly. You're good at that. Vera leaned in, her tone sharpening. You're so dramatic. I swear it's like you want to feel wounded. I actually tried to do something nice this time. If you take one more thing from me, my name, my work, my dignity, I promise you, I will make sure people know who really made what. She chuckled. Okay, warrior, relax. You've always had such a flair for the tragic. Look, you're lucky I even brought your little project. Otherwise, it'd still be sitting in Mom's clutter pile. I stood. I meant what I said. She blinked, unsure whether I was bluffing. Are you threatening me? No. I'm telling you this is the last time. I turned and walked away. No tears. No drama. Just steps that didn't look back. Later that day, while I sat outside my apartment with the last of my coffee, Callum pulled up in his old Subaru. He stepped out slowly, glanced around, and walked over. "I heard about the embroidery," he said. "I saw the whole thing. I'm sorry." I nodded. He reached into his jacket and handed me a folded sheet of paper. "That's from your original note. Vera tossed it. I pulled it from the trash before anyone saw." I opened it, my handwriting, smudged but clear. "To Mom, for all the roots you gave us. Love, Carmen." I blinked back something that wasn't quite a tear. "She's always been like this," Callum said, his voice low. "But you're the first one who's ever stood up to her." I nodded again, slower this time, not because I was afraid, but because I finally believed him. It was late afternoon when they gathered everyone by the garden wall for the group photo. The sky had softened to that warm honey color that shows up only in family albums, intentional or not. Someone had brought out an old bench, draped in a patriotic throw, and Vera was already moving people into position like she was the director of a stage play. "Okay, tall folks in the back," she called out. "Kids up front, and let's keep it symmetrical." I stood near the edge of the patio, debating whether to step forward or just stay out of frame altogether. But someone waved me over. Henrietta, surprisingly. Her hand barely lifted, a subtle but visible cue. So I went. Vera spotted me as I made my way across the grass and pasted on a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She was busy adjusting collars, brushing lint off shoulders, playing host to the idea of perfection. She looked at me and said, "Oh, good. Carmen's here. You're right in the middle with me." There was no warmth in it. No joke either. Just direction. Just ownership. I stood next to her, stiff, hands folded in front of me. The cousin with the phone was filming from the side, giggling with Noira about capturing candid behind the scenes for Instagram. The timer on the main camera started its beeping countdown, 10 seconds. Then Vera turned to me, eyes wide with manufactured concern. "Oh, wait, your dress has a wrinkle. Let me just—" I felt her hand at my back, not gentle, not adjusting. It was a sharp yank. Fabric gave way with a ripping sound so loud it seemed to echo off the stucco. My breath stopped in my chest. There was a pause in the air, like the kind before thunder. Then I felt it. The breeze across skin that should have been covered. My dress had split open, right along the seam, from the back of my waist to the top of my hips, exposing the scar I had fought so hard to live through, to cover, to protect from moments exactly like this. Gasps. A cup dropped somewhere behind me. One of the kids pointed and whispered, "Mom, what happened to her?" I didn't move. Couldn't. I was too aware of everything, of the silence, of the dozens of eyes now pretending not to stare, of the phone still filming from the side, catching it all. For a split second, I expected someone, anyone, to jump in, cover me, shield me. But they didn't. They froze, just like I did, except for Callum. He took 2 long strides forward and shrugged off his jacket, but by the time he reached me, I'd already turned. I met Vera's eyes. She stood frozen, mouth parted like she was about to say, "Oops." But she didn't. She knew. We both did. I turned from her and walked through the grass, through the whispers and fake gasps and turned shoulders. I walked straight into the house without saying a word, the wind still grazing my lower back. I could hear Callum behind me, his footsteps quicker now. But I didn't stop. Not until I was in the guest bathroom with the door locked behind me. I sat down slowly, back against the wood, breathing shallowly. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, because I was, but because the damage was too calculated to waste tears on. "It's not the scar," I whispered to no one. "It's how she made it grotesque." There's something about medical scars. They don't just mark your skin, they etch your timeline. That scar was the physical proof that I had survived something silent, private, painful, something I had navigated alone, with dignity, and now it had been turned into a punchline, turned into a spectacle. Because Vera couldn't just be center stage, she needed someone underneath her heel to prove she belonged there. I heard light footsteps approach the door. Then a knock. "Aunt Carmen?" Noira's voice, hesitant, softer than usual. I didn't answer. I didn't know, she said. I'm sorry. Another pause. She shouldn't have done that. I closed my eyes. The apology, small as it was, landed. It wasn't enough to fix it, but it mattered. A minute later, I heard her walk away. I stood up, fixed what I could of the dress using a safety pin from the drawer under the sink. Henrietta always kept a little sewing kit tucked behind the mouthwash, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't flinch. My reflection looked like someone who had finally reached the edge, and sometimes that's exactly where you find your footing. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and the porch lights were switched off, I stepped outside into the night air. Callum was leaning against his car, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at him. "Are you?" He offered a tired half-smile. "No." We stood there for a few seconds in mutual silence. Then I said, "You want a war, Vera? Then you'll see what happens when the quiet one speaks." By the time I got home that night, the adrenaline had worn off, but something colder stayed with me, something cleaner, like clarity. I washed my face, peeled off the ruined dress, and folded it into a brown paper bag, as if I were handling evidence. I didn't cry, I didn't need to. Instead, I made tea, sat on the couch, and watched the notifications pop up on my phone one by one. Group texts from family members asking if I was okay. A couple from cousins who said, "That was awful, Carmen, I'm so sorry." One even said, "She went too far this time." But none of them had said a word when it happened. Not one of them stood between me and Vera's cruelty. I was about to turn my phone off when Callum's name appeared on the screen. The message was short. "If you want to see how far she's gone, check this." Attached were 4 screenshots. The first 2 were emails from an insurance provider addressed to me, but sent to an unfamiliar email address. The third was a summary of claims, post-op counseling, prescription reimbursements, submitted under my name, billed to my employer's insurance. The fourth was a note from Vera's shared office printer. "Transfer remaining balance to personal card. Carmen doesn't check this stuff." I sat back, the phone still in my hand. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a gray area or a moment of overstepping. This was theft, identity misuse, fraud, and suddenly the scar wasn't even the worst violation anymore. By the next morning, I had barely slept, but I felt more awake than I had in weeks. I texted Callum and asked to meet somewhere neutral. We settled on a small cafe near the river, quiet enough to talk, busy enough to keep things civil. When I arrived, he was already seated in the far corner with a black coffee and a manila envelope beside him. "Morning," he said, nodding. "Hey." He slid the envelope toward me. "It's all there. Emails, paperwork, even a voicemail I recorded by accident." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were printed screenshots and a flash drive. I stared at the contents for a moment before speaking. "You knew she was doing this?" He sighed. "I suspected. I didn't have proof until recently." "Why now?" He paused. "Because I saw her rip your dress, and I saw how no one said anything, and I saw you walk away like you weren't afraid. That woke me up." I nodded, carefully sliding the folder into my bag. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want reality restored." That same afternoon, I walked into a legal clinic downtown. The pro bono office was tucked inside a building that used to be a DMV, and it still smelled like tired linoleum and copier toner. I met with a young lawyer named Alex, who reviewed the documents while sipping lukewarm coffee from a cracked mug. After 10 minutes of silence, she looked up. "This qualifies as identity theft, definitely misuse, and if the provider pursues it, it could lead to charges." I nodded once. "Are you ready for that?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, "but I don't want to destroy her. I just want it known. I want the truth back." Alex offered a small smile. "That's the healthiest client motivation I've heard all month." I left the clinic with a copy of the report and next steps. On the drive home, I rolled the window down and let the air hit my face. I didn't know what justice would look like, but I knew I wasn't going to keep living in a version of the truth that wasn't mine. That night, I started organizing everything. Photos, dates, the embroidery project, a copy of the invite to the reunion where my name had been misspelled. Even screenshots of Vera's public posts praising herself for the family tree. I reached out to my cousin Allison. "Do you remember who made the embroidery for Mom?" There was a pause on the line. "You did," she said, cautious. "We all knew." "Then why didn't anyone say anything?" Another pause. "Because it's easier to stay on her good side than risk the fallout. You know how Vera is." "Yeah," I said. "I know. Are you doing something with this?" "Yes." "Well," she said, her voice quieter now. "Then I'm here if you need me." After we hung up, I opened a new document on my laptop and started drafting an outline, not a legal one, a personal one. A script, not for a courtroom, for my life, for the version I had let her write for far too long. 3 weeks from now, the family would gather again, this time for a tribute to my father. The first since he passed. Vera would be at the center of it, of course. She had already posted about it, calling it a legacy celebration in her carefully curated Facebook voice. But this time, I wouldn't be on the sidelines. This time, I'd speak. Not to embarrass her, not to destroy her, but to reclaim myself, to take back every lie she ever told with my name in it. The sun dipped low on the Saturday afternoon of my father's memorial. By 5 o'clock, the caterers had finished setting the tables, and the garden had been transformed. Paper lanterns swayed gently from tree branches, casting soft shadows across the lawn. Folding chairs in neat rows faced a makeshift podium set beside the fire pit. His favorite spot for telling stories none of us ever corrected. It was all very polished, too polished. The Facebook invite said, "A celebration of legacy." Vera had written that herself. She'd been sharing throwback photos and captions like, "Honoring the man who shaped us all," for weeks. Comments rolled in from distant cousins and church friends praising her for being the glue, the backbone, the daughter who always steps up. And of course, she arrived first, dressed in a flowing white jumpsuit with gold cuffs and her hair pinned up like she was delivering a eulogy at the Emmys. I showed up 20 minutes later, alone, wearing a navy dress, simple, elegant, unashamed of the faint curve of my scar visible along my side. I didn't bother with makeup heavier than usual. The truth didn't need a filter. People turned when I stepped onto the grass. Not all of them, but enough to notice. Enough to remind Vera that I hadn't disappeared. She caught sight of me near the drink table and waved with the fake cheerfulness of someone who had hoped I wouldn't come. "Carmen, you made it!" "I said I would," I replied, then turned to grab lemonade from the glass dispenser, ignoring the small tremor in my hands. The night moved along in a blur. Some distant relatives read poems. A slideshow played on loop. People shared sweet, safe memories, camping trips, grandkids, Dad's terrible jokes. All the kinds of stories that never invited complication. Then it was Vera's turn. She walked to the mic like she'd been waiting for this her entire life. Her voice trembled in rehearsed places. "My father was the kind of man who taught us how to love without conditions." She paused, looked toward the horizon like she could see the afterlife. "And when he got sick, I made it my mission to care for him as he cared for us." I stayed seated, silent, eyes fixed on the paper in my lap. She kept going. "Being there for Mom, organizing these events, holding the family together, it's not easy, but someone has to. I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it's right." Applause. A few people wiped their eyes. Phones came out to record. She smiled, basking in the moment. "I just want to thank those who see beyond flaws, who understand that doing your best sometimes means doing more than your share." That was the moment I stood. My heels clicked softly against the stone as I walked toward the front. I passed Callum on the way. He didn't move. He didn't need to. We had already spoken. Vera's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something behind them. Uncertainty. I stepped up to the mic. My voice didn't tremble. "I'd like to add something." The audience shifted. A few whispers passed between relatives. Mom leaned forward in her chair, one hand gripping the edge of her purse. "I didn't plan to speak tonight," I began. "But since we're talking about legacy, It seems fair to ask, who gets to write it? I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen behind me changed. Not another photo montage, but a scanned email. I found out recently that someone used my name, my legal identity, to submit insurance claims for services I never received. The crowd stilled. Another click. A list of transactions appeared. Dates, services, approvals. I thought it was a mistake. Until I received this voicemail. The speaker played her voice, Vera's voice, laughing. She's too soft to fight back. Carmen won't do anything. A low murmur rolled through the crowd. She was right about one thing, I said. I was soft. I believed that being quiet kept the peace, that staying out of the way was the same as being respected. I thought being invisible was better than being inconvenient. I paused, looked out over the sea of faces. But soft doesn't mean weak, and silence isn't consent. Gasps. A chair scraped back suddenly. Mom stood up slowly, her face unreadable. She turned toward Vera. Is this true? Vera didn't answer. She blinked. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Did you do this to your sister? Still nothing. Someone in the back cleared their throat. A cousin turned off their phone camera. The night air suddenly felt cooler. I stepped away from the mic. I'm not here to ruin her, I said calmly. I'm here to reclaim me. A quiet voice from near the fire pit replied, You did the right thing. It was Brian, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. He used to work for the city. Now I remembered, he was a compliance officer. Legal mind. Good heart. Others looked around, some nodded. Vera stood there for another beat, then turned and walked off, the hem of her jumpsuit catching on the stones. No one followed her. The cameras didn't stop. I walked back to my seat. Callum was still there. He gave the smallest nod. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I sat with the weight of what I'd done, not because it felt triumphant, but because it felt necessary. Truth had finally stood taller than the lie. The ride home from the tribute was silent. No music. No news radio, just the low hum of the tires on pavement and the wind rustling against my half-open window. I didn't replay what I'd said or wonder if it landed. I didn't worry about Vera's next move. I just drove. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. I walked inside, dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, and kicked off my shoes with a sigh that felt older than me. The house greeted me with its usual stillness. No applause, no camera flashes, no hushed commentary. Just quiet, the kind I used to fear. But that night, it felt like freedom. I made a cup of tea. While the kettle boiled, I noticed a loose thread on the cuff of my sleeve. I grabbed the sewing kit from the drawer, sat at the kitchen table, and stitched it back into place with 3 careful movements. I didn't do it to fix the shirt. I did it because I could, because it was mine. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting right away. Inside was a set of neatly stapled divorce papers and a folded note from Callum. I sat down on the couch and read it slowly. Carmen, thank you for reminding me that silence isn't always safety. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant staying out of the storm. But peace built on someone else's pain isn't peace at all. I'm choosing better, for me and for Noira. Whatever comes next, I wanted you to know. You helped me see clearly. Callum. I held the letter for a long time, not because I needed validation, but because it marked something real, a shift, proof that I wasn't the only one waking up. The next morning, I poured myself coffee and opened my phone. There it was, Noira's post, right at the top of my feed. It was a photo from the memorial. Me at the microphone, mid-sentence. No filters, no edits. Her caption read, The real strength isn't in smiling through abuse, it's in walking away from it. Love you, Aunt Carmen. In less than an hour, it had already been shared dozens of times, with comments from classmates, old neighbors, even a couple of Vera's old PTA friends. I didn't cry from hurt. I cried because I was finally seen. Not the edited version, not the shadow Vera left behind. Me. Later that week, I stopped by Mom's for lunch. It was just the two of us, No special occasion, no catered trays or folding chairs, just sandwiches and iced tea at her kitchen table. She didn't bring up Vera, neither did I. But as we sat there, I noticed the tribute plaque from the living room had been taken down. In its place was a photo of Dad holding me at a birthday party, frosting on his chin and my small arms wrapped around his neck. "Where did that picture come from?" I asked. "It was in a box in the garage," Mom said, sipping her tea. "I found it while cleaning. Thought it belonged here." I nodded. "It does." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You didn't just save yourself, Carmen," she said softly. "You reset this whole family." I didn't answer right away. Just let the words land where they needed to. 2 weeks later, Vera hosted what she called a rebuilding brunch. She sent out invitations, paper ones this time, with gold embossing and a quote about forgiveness at the bottom. I heard about it through Allison. No one went, not even Noira. I imagined Vera in that big kitchen, steam rising from untouched quiches, place cards fluttering in the air conditioning. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt done. I didn't want her punished. I just wanted to stop being punished for surviving. 1 year to the day after Dad's memorial, I hosted a dinner in my backyard. Nothing fancy. Pasta salad, grilled chicken, a bottle of wine passed around like it was sacred. No one dressed up. No one gave speeches. Just people, real and relaxed. Callum was there. So was Noira, who brought a pie she baked from scratch. Mom arrived late, but stayed the whole evening. Allison helped with the dishes. There were no toasts, no tributes, just a moment of stillness under string lights where someone snapped a photo of us all sitting around the table, smiling with tired, grateful eyes. In the picture, my dress slips just slightly below my collarbone, enough that a sliver of the scar is visible. No one asked me to cover it. Sometimes, the deepest wounds come from the people who were supposed to protect you. And healing starts when you stop letting silence speak for you. This wasn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been made small in their own family, whose truth was buried to protect someone else's image. What about you? Have you ever stood up when it was easier to stay quiet? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. There are more real family stories coming soon. You're not alone.